Hi, welcome to Al-Muqaddimah. My name is Syawish. Let me set up the scene. There's an army camped out somewhere in the very south of the Indian subcontinent, let's say in the year 1705. It's a huge army that, from a distance, might even look like a tent city. At its head is Shahanshah Muhyiddin Muhammad Aurangzeb ALAMGIR. He is the most powerful figure that the Indian subcontinent has ever seen up to that point. He's currently ruling more of India than literally anyone before him has. Only one man, Ashoka the Great, even came close to ruling this much of India, but even he fell short. Aurangzeb's empire single-handedly contributes a quarter of the global GDP. This is a very powerful and influential empire. However, at this moment, Aurangzeb probably doesn't feel very powerful. He is old and frail, too old to be leading an army. In the year 1705, he would be 86 or 87 years old. He is no longer the warrior that stood tall as he conquered kingdoms upon kingdoms. He is now a slouching old man whose voice probably isn't very strong and who probably cannot even see very well. I imagine that every morning he wakes up with a call to prayer in his tent, and then he prays and comes out of his tent. When he looks around, he doesn't see many familiar faces. He doesn't have any brothers there, or friends, or loyal generals. Most of his generals have died, replaced by a newer generation that Aurangzeb probably doesn't know very well. Despite this, despite the old age, the lack of strength, the death of Aurangzeb's old guard, Aurangzeb refuses to order his army to decamp and go home. He is an unrelenting warrior, obsessed with taking all of India in the body of a weak old man. Not only that, but his army is bogged down. He hasn't really made any progress in perhaps a decade. He wants to conquer all of India, but that just wouldn't happen. He just cannot do it. So why? What was Aurangzeb doing there at that age, and why was he so stubborn about wanting to push his army despite failure upon failure? He hadn't been to his capital in over 2.5 decades. What was Aurangzeb thinking, and why are we still talking about this man? Well, let's talk about that. Before we begin, I'd like to tell everyone that my merchandise store is now up on almuqaddimah.com, where you can find awesome wall posters like the Timeline of Islamic History, which condenses more than 1400 years of Islamic history into a beautiful timeline. We also have a map of the fall of Al-Andalus, which shows century by century how Muslim empires lost ground in Spain and Portugal until their eventual collapse on the Iberian Peninsula. So be sure to check it out. That's the best way to support Al-Muqaddimah and show off some love for Islamic history as well. Now, I happen to have a bit of a fascination with Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb ALAMGIR. This isn't really a history video, but rather it's a video about the human being behind that historical status. Stripping away his crown, his throne, his empire, and his titles, who he was underneath. I'm gonna try to understand what Aurangzeb was thinking at a time and why he made the choices that he did. Of course, we cannot know what Aurangzeb was actually thinking, and my understanding of him is going to be quite different than yours, so it's not set in stone. Now, he's generally seen by some people as being some kind of a tyrant who was so obsessed with power that he killed his own brothers, imprisoned his father, and oppressed political minorities. But that's not really true. Let's start with power hungry. Was he really power hungry? I wouldn't really say that. So Aurangzeb probably grew up hearing the legend of his father, Shah Jahan, who had been a great warrior and had conquered parts of South India, as well as the legends of his great-grandfather Akbar, the so-called Great. At the age of 10, Aurangzeb saw his father come to power upon the death of his grandfather, and his older brother, Dara Shikoh, was made Wali Ahad, or the crown prince. Now, Shah Jahan clearly favored Dara Shikoh, and he was not subtle about it. Dara was the apple of his eye, and nothing Aurangzeb could do could make him win his father's approval like Dara had. But that didn't mean that Aurangzeb wouldn't try. When he was 14, Aurangzeb, along with Shah Jahan and Dara Shikoh, was watching elephants wrestle. To get a better view, the three got on their horses and rode into the arena. One of the elephants, probably startled, ran towards the royal family, putting their lives in danger. While Shah Jahan and Dara Shikoh got their bearing, Aurangzeb rode towards the elephant with a spear in his hand. He injured the elephant by hitting him in the face. Meanwhile, Dara Shikoh, who was older, looked from the sidelines. Now that says a lot about both brothers, doesn't it? Not just that Aurangzeb was brave, but also that maybe he saw an opportunity to impress his father, but Dara didn't feel the need to. This sort of set the tone of the relationship between the two brothers and their father. Aurangzeb became strong and cunning, a proper warrior, to be more like his father, to impress him, while Dara didn't have to. He spent his free time reading and discussing philosophy because he didn't think that he would have to win anything since he was going to be the heir to the peacock throne. As both brothers got older, Aurangzeb was sent away from the capital and Dara was there with his father. Aurangzeb was a reliable general, but still Shah Jahan was quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Harsh on him. Let's keep this curse free. He was, for example, very insulting to Aurangzeb when he failed at the siege of Kandahar, which Dara Shikoh also botched. But he didn't get any of the flack that Aurangzeb did. So Aurangzeb worked hard to become good at what he did, and he also tried to be different from his brother, basically the opposite. Dara was more open to ideas from other religions, while Aurangzeb wasn't. He was more orthodox, while Dara was openly discussing ideas like reconciling Hinduism, a polytheistic faith, with the strictly monotheistic Islam. Additionally, there was another factor in all of this. The Mughals had a bit of a messed up succession system. When Shah Jahan came to the throne, he had all pretenders executed. His brothers, nephews, cousins, pretty much everyone. Before him, Shahanshah Jahangir, his father, had had his own sons revolt against him, including Shah Jahan, which Jahangir himself had done against his own father, Akbar. So there was this sense of competition in the house of Timur, which is the official name of the house of the Mughals. There was a saying that goes like, Ya takht, ya takhta, either the throne or the coffin. So Aurangzeb and his brothers probably knew that when their father dies, not all brothers are going to survive the succession struggle. Aurangzeb prepared for that, while Dara Shikoh didn't. In my opinion, it was after the siege of Kandahar in the early 1650s that Aurangzeb pretty much decided to go full scorched earth on his family. That's just my opinion. There's no actual evidence for it. Then, in 1657, Shah Jahan fell ill and the brothers picked up the sword. Even at that time, Shah Jahan was openly favoring Dara Shikoh over the other sons, and Aurangzeb probably decided to just go all in. He was allied with two of his brothers, Murad Bakhsh and Shah Shuja, against Dara Shikoh. When they faced Dara Shikoh, he was badly defeated and had to escape. Aurangzeb claimed to have found a letter from Shah Jahan to Dara Shikoh telling him to unite his allies and fight Aurangzeb again. Now, it could have just been a claim by Aurangzeb, but in all likelihood, it could also have been true. Anyhow, Aurangzeb deposed his father. He caught and executed Dara Shikoh and his brother Murad Bakhsh. Shah Shuja was driven out. Aurangzeb was then the undisputed emperor of the Mughal Empire. His father lived on for 8 years, and Aurangzeb pretended that his father was too ill and that he had abdicated and all that, but no one was buying it. So I don't think that he was power hungry. At least no more power hungry than all of his brothers or anyone else in his position would have been. The same is true for him being a tyrant. He wasn't any more or less of a tyrant than anyone else in his position. He is claimed to have killed 4.6 million Hindus somehow. I have no idea where the number comes from, or why Aurangzeb would do that, or even how he would do that. It's just a made-up number. There's no way around it. He had the highest percentage of Hindu advisors and ministers in his court of any Mughal emperor. He was supported by the Marathas during his succession struggle. He did destroy some Hindu temples, but most of them were associated with his enemies. He also did patronize Hindu temples. He cracked down on Hindu festivals, true, but he also cracked down on Muslim ones. Most of the things that he did was just him being a monarch, not a bigot. Monarchs are awful people in general, and Aurangzeb was no worse. He was a very capable monarch, though. I understand that some people, the Sikhs for example, wouldn't want to hear this, and I can totally sympathize with that. Aurangzeb executed the ninth Guru of the Sikhs, Guru Tegh Bahadur. This kind of religiously fueled animosity is understandable, and I don't mean to undermine anyone's feeling over this matter. Whatever he did was, however, frankly speaking, just business. The same was done by pretty much everyone in his place. Again, that doesn't justify any of it, but my point is that he wasn't some kind of embodiment of pure evil. He was just a man. He did do some things that primarily hurt Hindus and Sikhs, but he doesn't seem to actually harbor any amount of religiously charged hatred for non-Muslims. There's really no evidence of any sort of a mass genocide of the Hindus under his reign. I don't even know where to even start debunking that. It's such a ridiculous statement. Aurangzeb would forever be haunted by what he had done. He was a practicing Muslim, so much so that he didn't drink, which is quite rare for the Mughals. And so it must have weighed heavy on his soul that he had his own brothers killed and he had deposed his father. The mere fact that despite being unchallenged, Aurangzeb continued to pretend that his father was just sick and had chosen to stand down shows that he had perhaps some guilt for what he had done. He even sent gifts to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, but they were refused because they didn't consider him to be a legitimate sultan. He did that every year until his father died and the custodians of the holy mosques actually accepted the gifts. A traveler who met Aurangzeb during his time in South India noted that Aurangzeb wanted to continue his war against South India to make sure that he wouldn't become stale and let go of his power like his father had, and how easily he had deposed him. Before he died, Aurangzeb wrote a series of letters to his sons in which he clearly wrote that he was ashamed of the person that he had been and was scared to be facing God soon. So even in his old age, Aurangzeb thought that if he let go of power, if he stood down and let the next generation take over, he would become irrelevant and weak and would be deposed by his own sons. The cycle of sons rebelling against their fathers would continue. Honestly, the story of the Mughals is something of a Greek tragedy. Imagine all of that weighing down on your soul. He almost certainly died an unhappy man, haunted by what he had done. His desire for approval from his father turned into resentment and anger, and it drove him into doing awful things against his own family. He obtained power, but ultimately that power became a prison for him. He couldn't rest, he couldn't retire, he couldn't just let go. He was a warrior on the inside, probably because he thought of it as a way of impressing his father, and as he grew older, he couldn't let that go. Perhaps you can say that I am eulogizing him too much, but ultimately he was just a human being, right? The point is that he's not as bad as he's made out to be. These days, he's turned into this pure, cartoonish evil by Hindu nationalists who even want to destroy his tomb. His tomb is already pretty modest. It's no Taj Mahal, and they changed the name of a city that was named after him. The number 4.6 million Hindus that he supposedly killed comes from this ridiculous math that someone did. News Laundry has a video on that. I'll link it in the description. The title of this video is not just a reference to seeing the human that Aurangzeb was instead of the emperor, but also seeing him as a person rather than an icon or a myth. Everyone is projecting whatever they want onto him because of how much of an influential figure he was. I think the vilification of Aurangzeb was probably done by the Indian government before BJP as a subtle message to Muslims and Hindus. Of course, there was critique of Aurangzeb even in his own time, most famously by the Sikh guru, Guru Gobind Singh. who wrote a lot about him and even to him. He criticized Aurangzeb for being a tyrant who was trying to crush the Sikh people. He even goes as far as to say that if Prophet Muhammad was alive, he would support the Guru and not Aurangzeb. I think that template of the critique of Aurangzeb lived on until recent times. You see, before the BJP started vilifying the Mughals and all Muslim rulers of India as basically these cartoonish evil villains, Aurangzeb was seen as this orthodox extremist by, for example, Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India and one of its founding fathers. He was certainly bad, but not Islam, and not the Mughals, just him. In his book, The Discovery of India, Nehru paints Akbar and Aurangzeb with these very different colors as the templates of a good Muslim and a bad Muslim, respectively. Akbar, who married a Hindu princess, who discussed religion with Hindus, who tried to reconcile the differences between Islam and Hinduism, etc., is seen as a good Muslim, while Aurangzeb is called an extremist who hated Hindus just because of their faith. Both of them and their character are exaggerated in the discovery of India to make them contrast against each other. The view was then carried on by the Indian education system, and so it continued on. The reason that it continued on was because it was relevant. Basically, they were telling Muslims to be more like Akbar and not like Aurangzeb, while at the same time reminding Hindus that while some Muslims were bad, like Aurangzeb, there were many good ones like Akbar. The history that we teach our children in schools is largely propaganda. I don't think that there's any country that is an exception to that. It's not necessarily bad, in my opinion, because it's a tool for nation building. You want your children to learn who to be, not who their ancestors were necessarily. Often it's used to whitewash history, which I do think is bad, but still, its usage as a nation-building tool is very important. That's what the Indians did as well, and that was okay for a long time. Aurangzeb was sacrificed to save other Mughals and the secular nature of the Indian state. That's not the case anymore. Aurangzeb, the rest of the Mughals, and Muslims at large are being vilified. Every other day there's some ridiculous statement or proposal by the Indian government regarding history. When they say that Aurangzeb was the grandson of invaders, they're telling Muslims that they're invaders, no matter where they came from. Aurangzeb is now a straw man and a litmus test. They'll accuse Aurangzeb of anything they want, and if you don't 100% support it, no matter what poppycock it is, you're anti-Hindu and anti-India. Like I said, when we talk about Aurangzeb today, in general, we're talking about an imagined man. A man who has the name and some background of a historical character, sure, but nothing else. Not his personality, not his motivations, or anything else. We judge him by the morality that we have. You know, things like you shouldn't kill your brothers, or imprison your father, or try to conquer South India ceaselessly. Honestly, I think the lesson here is that if you cannot conquer South India in 10 years, go home. But the family that Aurangzeb grew up in, his relationship with his father, his brothers, the crown or coffin rule in his family, all of that is brushed aside. He's remembered as someone who cracked down on political minorities, but it's forgotten that he actively patronized Hindu temples and had many Hindus in his court. The love of his life was a Hindu girl, for God's sake. One of his mentors, the first finance minister, Raja Raghunath, was Hindu as well. All of that is put aside, and Aurangzeb becomes this deliverer of pain and misery upon Hindus whose descendants today imagine that all Muslims are somehow responsible for those imagined offenses. In reality, he was just an emperor who died more than 300 years ago. He was just a human being, and not a very vile one at that. He was just a man who wanted his father's approval, and the stakes for not winning were too high. He was someone who made himself good enough to win what was his birthright. He wasn't gonna be some nepo baby like his brother Dara Shikoh. He was a man haunted by what he had done and what could be done to him, a prison of his own and his family's making. In one of the letters he wrote, he mentions that he just wants to be forgotten, but we still keep talking about him. He was, after all, just a human being who died more than 300 years ago. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon. On the screen right now, you can see the names and tiers of the patrons. You can join them by pledging $1 or more to support the channel. Thank you for watching.